breakfast, health for bodies, and health for the environment, and how they're both completely connected. The healthy environment of Powell River is one of the reasons I live here, and why people are moving here to raise their families. To begin, I want to mention that I was part of the Let's Talk Trash team this year as a zero waste coordinator. I talked to many people and tourists about zero waste at Prisma, Seafair, and Blackbird Festival. They were hugely impressed by the Regional District Initiative. Tourists from Oregon, Australia, England were grateful for the option and the dishwashing station. The team initiative employed 4 people on a part-time contract for composting education and zero waste. There are many proud moments to share with people about leadership and innovation that the Regional District was displaying and working towards zero waste and reducing our landfill consumption, actively engaging in the Sustainability Charter. This coal export expansion proposal is completely opposite to that. This proposal affects both the health of bodies and the health of the environment. As far as health goes, we are leaders in cancer rates in Powell River, according to the BC Cancer Agency. 16% above the average rate was discussed with the incinerator proposal that we turned down. These rates would increase with the amount of coal dust, particulate, and mercury that the winds would be sending over, as well as affecting the workers on site. 85% of cancer is environmental, from food, chemicals, pesticides, contaminated water, and airborne toxins. Can we take the risk to have a few more temporary jobs, but then also have more people suffering from cancer and unable to work? Not to mention the coal dust effects on the eelgrass, which in turn distresses the large salmon run through that area, which in turn upsets the sport fishing and commercial fisheries. It would be a short-term gain that will have lasting ecological effects. As far as the environment goes, we just have to look to China itself to see what's happening over there. Yes, Colin, they are now in the same state as Britain was in the 1900s, polluted. The East is grey. In January 2013, Beijing had the toxicity level 40 times higher than their health standards. While America and Europe are cutting their emissions by 60 million tons a year, China is increasing its own by 500 million tons. Farmland is poisoned. Half of China's water supply is unfit to bathe in, never mind drink, and is full of mercury. We have to stop feeding this monster. Recent news is that China is desperately trying to go green. Who would have guessed? The environmentalists in China have pushed the government to spend $275 billion over the next 5 years to improve their air quality, which means a decrease in coal burning. In fact, they are changing plans on opening more coal burning plants. They're putting $70 billion into renewable energy, and their goal is to cut coal by 65% by 2017. So the worst polluter will now be the largest investor in green energy. Solar is now the energy of choice. It is cheaper now than coal, and the efficiency has dramatically increased. The executive director of the Sierra Club yesterday said, after he was arrested at the Keystone Tar Sands pipeline demonstration, that we have to keep 2/3 of the fossil fuels left in the ground if we are going to have a shot at survival in this future. That includes blowing tops off mountains to get coal. We must be strong leaders in this level of government, staying on our sustainable path. The federal and provincial government is setting us up on a path of environmental genocide. To ignore climate change is like sending a child to school with a temperature of 105 and expecting everything to be okay. It's not okay. Climate change is here. We have reached 400 parts per million in greenhouse gases. It's serious, and the time is now to be leaders in clean, sustainable decisions for the health of our bodies and the environment. I ask the regional district directors, please vote for a healthy, ecological, and economic path for Texada, Powell River, and the whole Earth community, and vote no to this expansion. Thank you.
Board and Chair of the Regional District and City Representatives, thank you for hearing me as a delegation today. My name is Caroline Leishman. I am a local built grain builder, project manager manager and architectural designer for a construction company in Color River. Also co-founder of Pebble and Pond Environmental Society. And on the side, I teach musical theater to kids and adults. I apologize for the lengthy report, but I have a lot of information to get through. Lafarge Canada has applied for a permit to expand its coal storage capacity on Texada Island. This seems like a simple case of you, the regional board, saying that you support it as long as you add the disclaimer that it will be subject to rigorous and ongoing environmental monitoring by the province to mitigate potential impacts of coal dust on human health and the marine environment. But please think very carefully before you make this public declaration of support to the world, and take into consideration that there is much more to what you're effectively giving your stamp of approval to. This project expansion is much more than simply increasing the amount of coal to be stored and transported through Texada, and it is much more than the promise of a few jobs on Texada. By supporting this application, you would be effectively supporting the supply and transport of the dirtiest thermal coal on the planet from Wyoming and Montana in the United States to China and other Asian markets, encouraging the continued use of dirty coal energy production and turning the catastrophic air pollution levels in China to unlivable levels with very little economic benefit to BC, but with all the risks and environmental and health impacts attached to it at our end. This is not Canadian coal that is going to be shipped with this expansion, and it's not metallurgical coal that will be used to produce steel. It is U.S. thermal coal, the dirtiest, low-grade coal on the planet, that the U.S. no longer wants due to their new federal regulatory changes towards a more sustainable future, and none of their coastal ports will ship it. So they have turned to BC to be the coal transporters. By supporting this permit application, the Palmer Regional District will be going down in history as being the first and possibly only regional district or municipality to publicly endorse the expansion of thermal coal exports through the Pacific Northwest, effectively pushing BC to be the largest exporter of coal in North America. According to an international Greenpeace study published in January 2013 titled "The Point of No Return, the Massive Climate Threats We Must Avoid," the U.S. plans to export an additional 190 million tons of coal a year, mainly through the Pacific Northwest. This would add 420 million tons of CO2 a year to global emissions before 2020. The report goes on to warn the key to avoiding climate chaos is to act immediately to reduce emissions in this decade. Climate scientists calculate that the carbon that has already accumulated in the atmosphere will likely increase the average temperature by another 0.8 of a degree Celsius. Therefore, the room to maneuver to reduce emissions is getting smaller all the time, given the continued ineffective action of governments. And further in the report, coal burned to produce electricity already pumps more CO2 into the atmosphere than any other source of conventional power. Coal-fired power plants are responsible for 3/4 of locked-in emissions in the power sector. Coal burning also produces pollutants and toxic emissions that cause hundreds of thousands of deaths a year. That is a Greenpeace report. By endorsing this expansion permit, you are giving a clear message to all the residents of not only Palmer Regional District, but also to Seashell and the Lower Mainland, the Lower Sunshine Coast, Delta, Surrey, White Rock, and everyone between Wyoming and Montana to Fraser-Surrey docks, that you don't care about the health, safety, and environmental implications this expansion will cause to their communities when open rail cars, nearly 2 miles long, loaded with thermal coal will pass through their towns on a daily basis, past parks, schools, communities, creating not only increased respiratory conditions like asthma, lung cancer, and COPD due to not only coal dust blowing off the open rail cars, because the dust control agents are not always very effective, but also due to the diesel particulate matter from the massive increase in train traffic that they will have to live with on a daily basis. What are the economic implications of the side effects to these communities that effectively will come out of BC healthcare budgets? By endorsing this expansion project, I know you think you're giving the thumbs up to industry and the local economy, but I know that talking to people who work for Lafarge, they say there are not really going to be any additional jobs initially, that apparently 2 guys will get moved over from the quarry who currently work there to run automated coal handling equipment. that if the expansion got to what they project, 8 million tons of coal a year, they might possibly hire 1 or 2 guys. I don't have, that's not coming from the head of Lafarge, but that's what is rumored to be going around. The possibility of blowing coal dust contaminating our pristine air and water is not only a possibility, but a likelihood if this project expansion proceeds. What do you imagine the economic implications will be to our area if the salmon die off because coal dust and runoff contaminates the foreshore around Texada and Mesquite Island, killing off the eelgrass where the herring spawn? How do you think our fishing and tourism sectors will be affected if there are no fish, no shellfish, no marine life left in our waters? Then it will be too late to take back the endorsement. Fraser Surrey Docks has been ordered by Port Metro Vancouver to complete an environmental assessment of the expansion project, assessing the health and ecological effects of this project. In addition, Fraser Surrey Docks are significantly altering the coal handling in Surrey in response to concerns about the health impacts of open storage and coal dust dispersal. Why are these same safeguards not being demanded of the project on Texada Island, and why are the same safeguards not going to be in place for the areas the open barges loaded with coal will pass through on their 12-hour journey between Fraser Surrey Docks and Texada Island, or as they pass by the 3 provincial parks? And is the Regional District Board aware that the environmental assessment being ordered by Port Metro Vancouver of Fraser Surrey Docks does not extend to the Strait of Georgia or Texada or Mesquite Island? Why are you not ensuring that any safeguards or requirements are in place specifically? Are you satisfied with this suggestion in the motion that will assume that the province or some other authority will take care of the requirement of being subject to rigorous and ongoing environmental monitoring by the province? You do realize that this will not happen, as we have seen at other coal shipping ports in BC, such as Ridley Terminals in Prince Rupert, that was recently accused of deliberately dumping coal into the ocean and allowing coal-laden water to cover the shoreline. Is that really as far as you're willing and able to go to protect our air, land, and water? Do you really think that there will be provincial inspectors on site on a consistent basis, making sure operations are being strictly and safely carried out and that mishaps are not taking place? Furthermore, have you asked yourself why the coal is coming to BC? Could we possibly consider that our regulations in Canada are of a lower standard and they allow a backdoor for the US to use us as their exporter? These are backhanded federal standards. They're currently allowing us to continue to ship asbestos, for example, which is banned for use in Canada as a building material, and yet we are shipping it to overseas markets in mainly developing countries, even though our own regulations ban it, and we recognize that it is the #1 cause of workplace-related death in Canada, and approximately 107,000 people die each year worldwide from exposure to asbestos. And yet our federal regulations allow us to continue mining it and selling it to other countries. That's the World Health Organization statistic, July 2010. With the increase of tanker traffic to our area is an increased chance of a mishap, like a tanker running aground in foul weather, or due to mechanical failure causing a spill of diesel or oil in our waters. In a recent Globe and Mail article published August 25th, BC Environment Ministry bureaucrats voiced a range of misgivings for Environment Minister Mary Pollock. Quote, the Ministry of Environment, as the ministry responsible for preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery for spills, is not adequately staffed and resourced to meet the existing and emerging expectations to address spills. They wrote that in the briefing book. They carried on to say, even a moderately sized spill would overwhelm the province's ability to respond and could result in a significant liability for government. The industry requirements established by Transport Canada are perceived as being insufficient in both scope and scale. For example, in both Washington State and Alaska, industry requirements are far in excess of what is required in BC. End quote. Do we really want to rely on the province to look after safety and inspection, or put blind faith that an incident is handled efficiently and thoroughly when it does happen? On July 22nd, 2010, the Powell River Regional District formally adopted a sustainability charter for Powell River and region that sets out parameters and guidelines for local government to utilize in making decisions that will affect the future of the community at large, including the global community that is our planet. As stated in the charter, practically, the charter is very important to local government. It formally demonstrates an ongoing commitment to sustainability. The charter will also set clear criteria that elected officials and staff of local governments can use to assess projects. The following charter principles that would apply in this scenario: recognizing and respecting Tla'amin Aboriginal rights, title, and cultural history and existing agreements, recognizing ecological limits, taking the long view, promote self-reliance, manage uncertainty, which is exercising caution when in doubt about the impacts of a project or initiative. We will take action to safeguard the environment and society. And the final one, I didn't include all of them, consider local and global sustainability. While the sustainability of our local community is important, we will not forget that our actions and choices have impacts elsewhere and act accordingly. When you further read the goals of the 3 pillars for the Sustainability Charter, and especially the description of the Healthy Environment pillar, it becomes clear that expanding coal exports in this region is not consistent with the Charter in any way. I would consider very heavily before voting to support this project whether the First Nations have been adequately consulted on this permit application and how they feel about putting their traditional territory at such greater risk. When these Panamax single-hauled freighters with questionable safety records will be coming into our fragile waters, dumping their polluted bilge water brought over here from China, which could potentially be full of parasites, toxins, and bacteria, and contaminate our marine life. I want you to weigh the responsibility very dearly on your shoulders and make sure you're prepared to live with the ramifications of this project going very wrong for our area, potentially threatening our salmon stocks, and giving residents in our community increased incidences of asthma and lung disease, not to mention threatening our tourism industry. These are just a few of the concerns. Considering Lafarge must resubmit their stormwater plan and has yet to submit an application under the Environmental Management Act explaining what waste, coal runoff, and what volume of this waste is involved, how can there possibly be enough information to make an informed vote? I hope you will seriously consider reversing your stance on this highly impactful project expansion and not endorse it publicly, because this project is bad for the planet, bad for BC, and potentially worse for Powell River and region. And if you endorse it now, I'm very afraid that there will be some very negative national media coverage following it, which is not good for Powell River. To end that portion of my letter that I submitted on September 15th, I have 295 people in the region that have added their names to this letter. And I have a breakdown. 44 from Lasqueti Island have personally contacted me, 39 from Texada Island, 195 Powell River and Regional District residents, and 17 people that live elsewhere, Sunshine Coast, Denman Island, Gabriel Island, all at Comox in the area, but they're not in our regional district. They also wanted to be added to the letter, for a total of 295 names, and that is just in a week and a half. I also created an online petition that has 336 signatures on it. A couple of them are duplicates. But just to give you an idea that in a week and a half, and this is in my spare time at between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. because I work a lot and I do a lot. This is really not trying very hard. It's just putting it out there to the community and to the residents to see how they feel about this. Additionally, communities in the Lower Mainland, I'm connected to several groups down in the Lower Mainland. They've been speaking up against the same exact coal export expansion, but from the Fraser-Surrey Docks end. And between Coal-Free White Rock, Communities in Coal, the Dogwood Initiative, the Wilderness Committee, and other citizen activist groups, they've collected a total of 22,000 signatures opposing this very expansion project. So that's something to take into consideration, even though they don't live in our regional district. I had emailed a copy of on September 14th, Powell River Sunshine Coast NDP constituency. We had a meeting on September 14th, and at that meeting a resolution was passed and has been sent to the provincial NDP office for inclusion in the November convention resolutions. And I'll read that. Resolution to the BC NDP Convention from the Palaver and Sunshine Coast NDP Constituency Association. Whereas the proposed Fraser Surrey Docks coal terminal expansion would receive up to 10 2-kilometer long trains per day, up from the current 6 per day, each with up to 6 diesel locomotives with 130 100-plus ton open coal cars per train from Montana, past residential neighborhoods and schools in White Rock, Crescent Beach, and North Delta, with some of that coal being loaded on up to 4 open barges per day bound for Texada Island, where it would be open stockpiled while awaiting shipment overseas. And whereas open rail car shipment and the accompanying coal dust plume threatens communities along the rail line, including Burns Bog, and the open barging of coal threatens the marine ecosystems and beaches of the Salish Sea. And whereas Port Metro Vancouver has arbitrary authority to vastly increase the coal shipping capacity at Neptune, Fraser Surrey Docks, and Delta Port, and has failed to fairly consult with citizens and local governments. And whereas the civic governments of Metro Vancouver have voted 21-4 to oppose Port Metro Vancouver's plans to increase shipments of U.S. thermal coal. And whereas the U.S. thermal coal destined for electrical generation in China and elsewhere is of the lowest grade and will produce massive greenhouse gas emissions, further exacerbating climate change and ocean acidification. And whereas major economies around the world, including Europe, the U.S., and China, are reconsidering their electrical generation technologies, demanding higher combustion standards, and are moving to greater reliance on renewable green energy technologies, particularly solar, to meet their energy needs. This, combined with improving environmental regulations, is and will continue to undermine the economics of thermal coal, increasing the financial risks for transportation and export infrastructure investments, including those of Port Metro Vancouver. And whereas the coal transshipment business in Fraser Surrey would see the lowest level of job creation, a mere 25 jobs as compared to many more jobs that could be created with many other economic development initiatives of similar value. And whereas coal dust escapement from coal trains is rated at approximately 1.5% per car per trip, resulting in 700,000 plus tons a year gone with the wind. And whereas over 400 scientifically reviewed medical research papers document the negative health impacts from diesel particulate matter, coal dust, noise exposure, marine spillage, and potential wrecks. And whereas the Ramscar Convention on International Wetlands has designated 5 sites in the Fraser Delta for protection, some of which will be negatively impacted by increased thermal coal shipments. And therefore, be it resolved that the BC NDP and the NDP caucus commend the civic governments of Port Metro Vancouver for their opposition to increased shipments of U.S. thermal coal from BC ports, demand the province of British Columbia undertake a comprehensive and cumulative health and environmental impact study to recognize international standards of the effects of the current 6 train per day transshipment of U.S. thermal coal transshipment to BC ports, and legislate regulations to fully mitigate any negative impacts. Ask the federal NDP to stand with the BC NDP in opposing at the national level increased U.S. thermal coal exports through BC ports. Promote increased awareness on the part of all citizens as to the health, social, economic, and environmental benefits of developing green energy technologies and a green economy juxtaposed to increased reliance on fossil fuel consumption for electrical generation both here and around the world. Demand that Port Metro Vancouver declines to accept increased U.S. thermal coal transshipment through BC ports, and stand in firm opposition to the increased export of U.S. thermal coal from all BC ports. I just today was sent a copy of this letter that was sent to Craig Neeser, Board Chair of Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and Robin Sylvester, President and CEO of Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and CCing Jeff Scott, CEO of Fraser Surrey Docks. It is titled Inadequacies in Announced Environmental Impact Assessment for Fraser Surrey Docks Direct Coal Transfer Project. It is signed by 34 professionals, doctors, physicians, professors, and PhDs, stating, "Dear sirs, we write today to express our concerns over the environmental impact assessment that the Port Authority has requested for the proposed coal export terminal at Fraser Surrey Docks. Proposals to dramatically increase the export of coal from Metro Vancouver, including U.S. thermal coal imported by rail, may have profound implications for public health, the livability of our region, and the maintenance of a stable climate. These proposals deserve a careful, cumulative assessment of health and environmental impacts. While in principle we agree that an environmental impact assessment for this project would be a good thing, what was announced on Thursday, September 11th, fails to live up to environmental impact assessment best practices for several reasons. The EIA terms of reference have not been made public. Concerned stakeholders have no way to evaluate its scope, methods, or participants and their roles. The EIA fails to meet expectations of openness and transparency. Key stakeholders, including health authorities, regional and local governments, NGOs, and community groups, have not been involved in developing the scope or terms of reference of the study, suggesting that the assessment is being led by the proponent, Fraser Surrey Docks, and its consultant, SNC Lavalin, alone. The 2-week time frame for completion of the study is implausibly short. By way of comparison, scoping for the EIA for the proposed coal port in Cherry Point, Washington, the Gateway Pacific Terminal, took many months, and the draft EIA itself is expected to take up to 2 years. Fraser Health Authority has estimated that a comprehensive health impact assessment of the proposed coal port at Fraser Surrey Docks could take 6 months to a year. The assessment scope does not include impacts in the Strait of Georgia or on Texada Island. This appears arbitrary and unjustified given that, 1, the assessment will appropriately examine impacts associated with transport of coal by rail from the international border to the terminal, an area also outside the Port Authority jurisdiction. And 2, the assessment will appropriately examine impacts of transporting coal by barge along the Fraser River, even though at that point coal has been transferred from the control of Fraser Surrey Docks to Lafarge, Canada. The company will deliver it all the way to Texada Island. This is their request. The limited scope of the assessment does not allow for any consideration of the full scale of health, environmental, or climate impacts that would result from the project. In short, the flaws in the announced EIA are substantial. We respectfully request that you abandon this process and start over. We recommend that you involve key stakeholders directly in the process of developing the terms of reference and scope of the environmental impact assessment in order to ensure that the resulting process is open and transparent. Without openness and stakeholder involvement, it is unlikely that the results will appear credible or inspire public confidence. Furthermore, we recommend that you work closely with the regional health authorities to also conduct a comprehensive health impact assessment of coal export proposals in order that health-related impacts are given equal consideration to environmental impacts in the review process and in the examination of appropriate solutions. Specifically, we recommend that you consult with stakeholders to ensure that a full and comprehensive list of impacts is addressed in the scoping phase of environment and health impact assessments. Impacts addressed should include, but not be limited to, the impacts of burning coal exported on the global climate, the impacts of burning exported coal on local and trans-ocean air quality, the impacts of train noise on community health, the impacts of train traffic on emergency response delays and community well-being, the impact of diesel exhaust and particulate matter on community health, the impact of coal dust on community health, farmland, shellfish, and the marine environment. We also strongly recommend that the assessments examine the cumulative impact of all proposed increases in coal export in the region, not just those increases proposed for the new coal terminal at Fraser Surrey Docks, and that local impacts are considered from the time the coal enters the region by train to the time it enters international waters by ocean-going vessel. Finally, we wish to remind the Port Authority of its federal mandate to operate with broad public support in the best interests of Canadians. The Port Authority can only fulfill its mandate by working in an open and transparent manner and by involving stakeholders directly in decisions that will have a significant impact on their lives and on the future of their region. And this is signed by 34 PhDs, physicians, medical physicians, and professors from the Lower Mainland and Washington State. I further just want to refer to the Powell River Regional District Growth and Development Analysis Final Report, October 2008, regarding the proposed LNG terminal. The proposed, this is quoting the report, the proposed LNG terminal and power generation facility on Texada Island, if constructed, would create additional direct employment estimated at 100 jobs, which would have a substantial impact on the local labor market and generate significant spin-off employment as well, but the project's viability is questionable. There are substantial regulatory hurdles that the project must clear, and significant opposition by some members of the local and regional population. There are also questions about the feasibility of gas-fired power generation in a future with growing carbon taxation. That project was shot down, and I think that the 100 jobs that that project proposed outweighs this one, and you basically have stated the reasons in that we're looking at the same type of a project, but only they're stating 15 to 20 jobs. So I'm just quoting those comments in there. And I just want to also point out that with the increase in large Panamax and Cape-class freighters transferring the coal from Texada Island to Asian markets, there will be an increase in carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, and emissions of fine particles such as soot. Will the air monitoring promised for this expansion include a certain radius where such vessels will be idling while being loaded? Also, will the increased CO2 emissions due to these large ships coming into the area be included in the regional district's greenhouse gas emission tallies and calculations and be reported on accordingly? Because if so, you will probably see a spike in contributed CO2 for the region, and I would imagine if you're paying some sort of government carbon tax of any sort, it will increase, and you will not hit any potential CO2 target reductions that may have been within reach previously. I would like to request that if you are not going to vote against this permit amendment, which is ultimately the expansion of U.S. thermal coal through the Pacific Northwest, that you at the very least defer the vote until you can A, receive the revised stormwater management plan from Lafarge, as well as an application under the Environmental Management Act explaining what waste, coal runoff, and what volume of said waste is involved in this project and how they will mitigate any excesses. B, request the Ministry of Environment to require the submittal of a third-party environmental impact assessment and a health impact assessment for the Strait of Georgia and the region around Texada Island, Muscogee Island, and Powell River and Regional District. And C, carry out a comprehensive public consultation process so that all residents who feel this concerns their future have an opportunity to learn more and express their opinions, whether it be for or against the proposal. Thank you.